Everyone at that table thought I was the disappointment, until the butler walked in, looked directly at me and said, "Welcome back, Miss Tanaka. The boardroom is prepared." I sat silently at the long glass table in the rooftop dining room of the Shimizu Tower in downtown Tokyo, where our extended family met each spring for the Sakura season banquet. The panoramic skyline twinkled beyond the windows, but inside, the spotlight belonged, as always, to my cousin Kenji. Polished, arrogant, and wearing a custom-tailored suit, Kenji gripped his wine like a trophy. "So?" he boomed. "After my big pitch last quarter, the CEO pulled me aside and promoted me. Regional Director of East Asian Sales. Youngest ever." The table lit up with proud nods and congratulatory clinks of glasses. I quietly sipped green tea, keeping my expression neutral. No one at that table knew that the largest technology acquisition in East Asia's history would be finalized tomorrow morning. No one knew that I, Naomi Tanaka, their lost potential, was the founder and CEO of Miratech, the company acquiring Kenji's employer. "So, Naomi," my Aunt Yuki asked, trying to sound polite, "are you still dabbling in website design, or was it app consulting? It's hard to keep track." I smiled. If she only knew my dabble had just closed its Series C funding at a $110 million 0 cents valuation. "Something like that," I replied gently. Kenji leaned in, all patronizing charm. "If you're still figuring things out, I could probably find you a spot on my team at Aizu Systems, admin or entry-level analyst." Aizu Systems, the company Miratech would own by 9 a.m. tomorrow. "That's very kind," I said, nearly chuckling. My uncle grunted. "Naomi, you graduated top of your class from Stanford. You're 36. It's time you caught up with Kenji." I nodded, tracing the rim of my cup. He didn't know Forbes Japan had just listed me in their 2025 Top 30 Innovators, Reshaping the Future. And tomorrow, Kenji would walk into his office, only to find my portrait in the boardroom. And the butler, standing now at the entrance, said the words that made the whole room freeze. "Miss Tanaka, the board is waiting for you upstairs." Aizu Systems' Tokyo headquarters stood tall and gleaming, its boardroom prepared for a meeting that would change everything. What Kenji didn't know was that the aimless cousin he'd just offered a pity job to would be seated at the head of the table as his new boss. The Forbes Japan article had used the exact photo I'd approved, my silhouette framed against the rising sun, face turned in soft profile. Few people outside high-level investor circles had seen the founder of Miratech in person. That was by design. I'd built my company from the shadows, and I intended to keep it that way. "Remember when we were kids?" Kenji's voice dripped with smug nostalgia, the kind that assumes a lifelong upper hand. "You always said you'd run some company one day. That was a fun little dream, huh?" "Wilder than you know," I thought, folding my cloth napkin and placing it on my lap. Aunt Yuki, ever eager with unhelpful solutions, added, "Naomi, I know someone who runs a small printing shop. Maybe you could assist with orders, inventory, something flexible?" "Thanks, Aunt Yuki," I said with a gracious nod, gently sliding my untouched matcha tart aside. "But I'm doing all right." "All right?" Kenji scoffed. "Naomi, you rent a cramped flat in Setagaya, drive a beat-up Nissan Note, and what? Do contract gigs online? Meanwhile, I just closed the biggest tech deal in Aizu Systems history. Tomorrow's going to be career-defining." If only he knew. That deal he bragged about was the final phase of a quiet, strategic acquisition. Miratech had been quietly absorbing Aizu's liabilities for over a year. Tomorrow wasn't a merger, it was a takeover. And the contract he'd just signed? Finalized under observation by one of my junior counsel, while I watched via encrypted feed. "That's fantastic, Kenji," I said coolly. "I'm sure tomorrow will be illuminating." He raised his glass. "To legacy. Some of us are just built for it." Our uncle clapped him on the back like he'd unlocked immortality. "Now that's leadership, the future of the family." My phone buzzed, a message from my assistant. "Final list of Aizu Systems executives confirmed for interviews. Kenji is first, 9 o'clock I.m. sharp. Excuse me, I said, rising smoothly from the table. My mother sighed without looking up from her tea. Still answering support calls at this hour. I offered a tight smile and stepped out into the quiet hallway of the Tokyo Imperial Club, where our family banquet had been held each spring for over 2 decades. The polished black stone beneath my heels echoed softly as I reread the message. Everything was in place. And tomorrow morning, Kenji, the golden boy of our family, would walk into a job interview with me. The executive boardroom atop Miratech Tower had been prepared overnight, security briefed, presentation files synced, contracts waiting in black leather folders embossed with Miratech's Phoenix logo. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of my 56th floor office, watching the lights of Tokyo shimmer below like a circuit board. The scent of incense still clung to me from the restaurant. I could still hear Kenji's voice from hours earlier, brash, proud, unaware. My family had no clue that the freelancer they pitied was the one controlling the fate of their star. Kenji believed tomorrow was a ceremonial formality for the merger. He'd be walking straight into an executive performance review, chaired by me. I glanced at the clock, 7:42 a.m., just over an hour to go. Earlier that evening, I had returned to the dining table just in time for Kenji's speech. Success, he declared, raising his sake glass, is about knowing when to dominate. Not everyone has that instinct. You're absolutely right, I said softly. Tomorrow should be very revealing. He smirked. Still interested in that junior analyst role? There's a cubicle with your name on it. Something like that, I said, lifting my tea. To new beginnings. Driving home, I let their voices fade behind me, replaced with quiet focus. The apartment they thought was a studio? It was the penthouse at Azami Residences, overlooking Shibuya. The Lexus in the garage? Paid for the day I finalized our acquisition stake in IU Systems. As I reviewed the files that night, I nearly laughed. What began with a borrowed laptop in a shared cafe had become the empire they were walking into. Miratech now operated across 4 continents, and today it would quietly absorb the very company that made Kenji feel untouchable. That morning, I stepped into my private elevator, sliding the engraved black keycard into place. The digital panel glowed softly, 54, 55, 56. Top floor, executive boardroom. In the mirrored walls, I adjusted the collar of my ash gray Shinobu Atelier blazer. Today wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity, about standing in the full weight of my own power. And when Kenji sat across from me, with his resume and overconfidence, I'd offer him exactly what he never offered me: a chance. If he was worth the risk. I stood at the window of my penthouse office in Miratech Tower, the Tokyo skyline awash in pale morning gold. Below, the city pulsed with quiet energy. Reflected back at me was no longer the girl they doubted, but a woman who owned the future they never saw coming. "Good morning, Miss Tanaka," said my assistant, Hana, as I stepped out of the elevator. "The IU Systems executives are in the main boardroom. Your cousin arrived early, 15 minutes ago." Of course he had. Kenji always had to be first, always needed the upper hand. "How many times has he mentioned his promotion?" I asked. Hana glanced down at her tablet, trying not to laugh. 10 times so far, and 4 references to the Aizu Kyocera integration. I smirked slightly, smoothing my sleeve. "And our protocols? Phone secured, surveillance clean, contracts prepped, no leaks." "Perfect," I said, taking one last breath. "Let's begin." The Miratech boardroom wasn't just functional, it was symbolic. Clean lines, subtle dominance, every chair set with exacting purpose. It was a room built to redefine power. As we approached, Kenji's voice echoed from within. "Once the merger is finalized, I expect to oversee all Asia-Pacific accounts. I wouldn't be surprised if Miratech offers me a board seat." I pushed the door open with calm precision, and the room went silent. Silence dropped like a curtain. Kenji, midway through what could only have been another self-glorifying monologue, turned toward the doorway. His confident smirk faltered as confusion crept into his expression. "Naomi," he blinked. What are you doing here?" I didn't pause. I walked in with quiet precision, placed my leather briefcase at the head of the table, and met the gaze of every stunned executive seated around the Miratech boardroom. "Good morning, everyone. Apologies for the delay." Hana began distributing the acquisition packets to each person in the room, her movements calm and efficient. "There's some mistake," Kenji snapped, tension rising in his voice. "This is a confidential meeting. We're here to speak with Miratech's CEO about the merger." I opened my folder deliberately. "That's correct. I'm Naomi Tanaka, founder and CEO of Miratech." I let the words settle, and the silence that followed, it was delicious. "Now then, Kenji, about that merger. If you've been following my journey from whispered judgment to undeniable power, don't forget to subscribe, because what comes next isn't just a reveal, it's a reckoning." Around the table, the Aizu Systems leadership began flipping through their folders, expressions shifting from confusion to stunned clarity. Just yesterday, I was a name they barely acknowledged, an afterthought. Today, I was their new reality. "This is absurd," Kenji said stiffly, color draining from his face. You've been freelancing from a shared office?" "The freelancer story," I said with quiet composure, "was a smokescreen, just like the studio apartment you mocked, which happens to sit atop Azami Tower, a building fully owned by Miratech." Kenji stared like he was seeing me for the first time. In truth, he was. "Real success," I continued, stepping beside the digital monitor, "doesn't always show itself at family dinners. Sometimes it's quietly building a kingdom while everyone else is too busy performing." Click. The screen lit up with a sleek presentation, 12 months of shell acquisitions, proxy investments, and stealth takeovers. "This isn't a merger, it's an acquisition. Miratech now owns 51% of Aizu Systems, executed through silent acquisitions, finalized over the past fiscal year." And for once, Kenji had no comeback. Kenji's expression twisted. Shock curdled into something sharper. "You let me brag all night while you were planning this behind my back. While I listened to you take credit for your assistant's work. While you coasted on borrowed ideas, inflated metrics, and networking dinners," I said, my voice steady, never raised. Around the room, several executives shifted uncomfortably. Some had suspected. A few had even tried to speak up over the past year, but no one dared challenge Kenji. Not until now. As of 9:00 a.m. today, Aizu Systems is officially a Miratech subsidiary. Effective immediately, the executive leadership structure is under review. Kenji shot to his feet, his chair screeching back across the polished floor. "You can't do this! I'm regional director!" "Your position," I said calmly, "is being dissolved, along with several others identified as non-protective. However," I turned to the remaining executives, "the majority of operations staff will be retained. Miratech rewards results, not resumes padded with jargon." What followed was a blur of signatures, acknowledgments, and stunned departures. Executives filed out in silence, some still unable to look me in the eye. Eventually, only Kenji remained. He stood near the panoramic window, Tokyo sprawling beneath us like circuitry. His voice cracked. Why didn't you ever tell me?" I collected the final documents, placing them neatly into my briefcase. "Would you have listened?" He turned toward me, face pale and eyes glassy. "Every New Year's dinner. Every time you said you were figuring things out. You were building this?" I met his gaze. "Yes. While you were performing success, I was busy earning it." "You offered me an entry-level analyst role," I continued, my tone even, as if that was a favor. "You thought I'd be lucky to serve under you." Click. I closed my briefcase. Consider this a lesson in humility. Power doesn't need a spotlight to grow, it just needs focus. He opened his mouth, but my phone buzzed before he could speak. I didn't need to check. Mom and Dad lit up the screen like clockwork. I imagined his phone was ringing too, now that security had returned everyone's devices. The truth was out, and Tokyo was wide awake. I answered on speaker. "Hello, Naomi?" My mother's voice was sharp, brittle, almost panicked. "Tell me this isn't true. Tell me you haven't been hiding this from us all these years." "I never hid anything," I said calmly, adjusting the cuff of my blazer. "You just never asked the right questions. You were too focused on applauding Kenji to notice what I was quietly building." "But we tried to help," she insisted. "We offered to introduce you to people, to help you find a stable job." "I was busy building a multinational tech firm," I said simply. A rare smile touched my lips. Though I'll admit, hearing Kenji offer me an entry-level role at a company I was about to acquire, that was more satisfying than I expected. Silence. Then my father's voice, deeper, slower, filtered in. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I glanced at Kenji, still standing by the window like someone watching the floor vanish beneath his feet. Then I looked back at the phone. "Because I needed this to be mine," I said. "Not for your validation, not to prove anything. Just for me." I ended the call. At the doorway, I paused. "Oh, and Kenji? About that analyst job you mentioned? You might want to update your CV. Applications open next week." The next family gathering? Very different. No more whispered comments about my unfocused path. No more cousins ignoring me for corporate success stories. Suddenly, I was the story. The one they leaned toward. The one they now quoted. Kenji didn't attend. Rumor was, he'd accepted a quieter role at a mid-tier consulting firm. Not embarrassed, just humbled. My parents? They still fumbled when others asked about me. Sometimes they spoke proudly. Other times they hesitated, as if still reconciling who I had become with who they believed I was. And me? I'd moved into Miratech's new global HQ. My name etched in glass across the top floor. Some nights, when I stayed late, I'd catch a glimpse of my old apartment, still hidden between rooftops in Shibuya. A reminder of where I started, and why I never looked back. Success isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes, the most powerful person in the room is the one they overlooked until it was far too late. And the greatest shift? It wasn't in how they saw me. It was in how I saw myself. Because the best revenge? It's not revenge at all. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't, and not needing their applause to feel complete. Thank you for listening to a story I never thought I'd have the courage to share. If it resonated with you, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever been underestimated? Dismissed? All your vision was too unrealistic, too quiet, or too different to matter? I read every word. Because even after building a tech empire and taking back a seat they never thought I deserved, connection still matters. And if there's one piece of advice I'd leave you with, it's this. You don't owe anyone your story until you're ready to tell it. You don't need to explain your ambition to people who only understand attention, not growth. Build quietly, move smart, rise intentionally. And when it's time to step forward, you won't need to raise your voice. Your work will do that for you. If Naomi's story reminded you of your own strength, I hope you'll subscribe, because I have more stories to share. Stories that might help you reclaim your own voice, your own pace, your own power. And remember this. Just because they can't see your worth yet, doesn't mean you're not already becoming something extraordinary. And one day soon, they'll know it too.